Ever wonder why your Power Platform projects spiral into chaos as soon as more than one environment is involved? Today, we'll unpack how the PAC CLI could be the missing puzzle piece for finally bringing order to your DevOps workflow. By the end, you'll see why managing solutions, components, and plugins across environments isn't just possible, it's surprisingly smooth. Can a single set of commands save you hours of rework and headaches? Stick around and find out how the right PAC CLI strategy flips the script on Power Platform SPRAWL. Why PAC CLI feels different and actually matters. If you've worked in Power Apps for more than a day and tried to get your handiwork out of the Maker portal and into another environment, you know the feeling. The portal is quick for prototyping. Drop a button here, connect the flow there, and it all just works. Or at least that's the story until you try to move that app to a new environment. Suddenly, you're dealing with missing data sources. You wonder why the same thing that worked in dev is breaking in QA. Manual rework creeps in, renaming components, hunting for dependencies, patching settings that should have stayed in sync. It's like sending a group email and realizing half your attachments never made it. That initial sense of this is so easy that you get from the point-and-click experience fades fast the moment environments get involved. That's not just a minor hiccup, it's the reality most teams hit. Citizen developers and IT pros start off in the Power Apps portal because it's built to be friendly, at least on the surface. It walks you through building screens and automating workflows. But let's be honest, the moment you need to maintain what you built, or God forbid, scale it, cracks start showing. The Power Platform world was designed to let people create without code, which is fantastic until you realize that a real business app has to live in more than one place with consistent behavior every time. You can fudge it by manually redoing work, but long term, nobody wants to update 5 versions of the same button across 5 environments. That's wasted time. The big elephant in the room is change management. When you create components in the portal, it's easy to feel like everything is self-contained. But Power Platform's biggest strength, its flexibility, often creates headaches when you need to move things between environments. Suddenly, what you built isn't as portable as you thought. Even small differences between test and prod can turn into hours of troubleshooting, not because you've done something wrong, but because the portal simply isn't built for true portability or component reuse. You can get by for a while, but it's a fragile way to work, more like building sandcastles than real applications. So when people see the PAC CLI for the first time, the usual reaction is hesitation. A command line interface by itself feels like a throwback. You can almost feel the reluctance. Do I really want to mess with scripting when the portal covers most of what I need? But here's the weird thing. The PAC CLI isn't just a tool for pushing buttons through a different UI. It forces a change in mindset. Instead of thinking in terms of building once and dragging copies everywhere, you start to assemble solutions like a software engineer would. Components become assets with versions, dependencies, and proper life cycles. That's the leap most folks miss. There's a learning curve. But it's nothing compared to the treadmill of repeated manual work. It's almost funny. The CLI looks intimidating, but after a few tries, you start to see what it actually unlocks. Scripting your builds and deployments means you're not stuck clicking through the same screens over and over. You're not sitting there with a checklist, chewing your fingernails, and hoping you didn't forget to attach that one key flow. Instead, you script the process, and you know exactly what's included every single time. If a dependency is missing, the CLI tells you. If you switch tenants, you're not blind. No more wild guessing which environment you're in. No more opening 3 browser tabs just to double check your context. It's like switching from handwriting every invoice by hand to generating them through a billing system. Tedious becomes manageable. The sharpest difference isn't about automation for automation's sake. PAC CLI allows you to manage components with practices borrowed from real software engineering. Versioning, so you know what's running where. Reusability, so you're not reinventing the wheel. And maybe most important of all, it lets you actually troubleshoot. When things break, you aren't left with vague error pop-ups. You get logs, details, actionable steps. Teams who stick to point-and-click workflows often find that small bugs get multiplied every time they update a component by hand. Eventually, the app becomes brittle. Nobody wants to fix it. Everyone dreads even minor changes. At that point, business agility is just marketing speak. What's refreshing about the CLI approach is how quickly even basic DevOps ideas start making sense. You don't need to be a full-stack engineer to appreciate what happens when you can script moving a solution from dev to test to prod. Suddenly, things are predictable. You avoid those endless rounds of "it works on my machine" or "wait, which version is this?" Both IT pros and business users can benefit, especially the ones who swore they'd never touch a terminal terminal window. Once you get why the CLI matters, you start seeing those repetitive portal tasks for what they are, busy work. Still, the idea of scripts and setups can put some folks off. It feels like a risk if your environment is already running fine, or worse, if you've already bricked something before, just by trying the latest tool. But here's the thing, setting up PAC CLI doesn't mean torching your existing workflow. If you do it right, you can set up a parallel process, tinker, and experiment without putting your current apps in danger. And that first CLI-powered export or deployment where the whole solution just works across environments is oddly satisfying. Once you see it, you'll wonder why you stayed in the portal for so long. And that sets us up for the next step, getting PAC CLI running without breaking what's already in place. Turns out, avoiding the usual first-timer mistakes is easier than you'd think if you know what to watch for. Setting up for success without breaking what works. If you've ever watched a developer silently stare at their screen after a rogue CLI install, wipe their environment, you know why any new tool, especially one that runs outside a safety net, can trigger flashbacks. There's something unnerving about mixing business apps with command line utilities. You might want to get fancy with PAC CLI, but it's hard to ignore what's already running smoothly in your workspace. Nobody wants to be responsible for breaking critical flows or sideswiping a live Power app, especially if you're juggling work in shared sandboxes or worse, production. The reality is most teams have at least one story where a well-meaning deployment spiraled out of control just because someone followed a generic tutorial that left out boring details like authentication, dependency clashes, or how persistent installs mess with global settings. The first hurdle with Power Platform CLI is the install itself. Microsoft makes the documentation approachable, but it's easy to miss the part about environment separation. If you launch straight into installing on your daily driver, without thinking through profiles or how that authentication works in real life, you're opening the door to headaches. Those quiet moments where you catch yourself sweating over which tenant you're targeting, everyone runs into them eventually, usually after a warning window that pops up halfway through your first attempt at PAC AUTH CREATE. The tension comes from tutorials that gloss over the edge cases. Just install it globally and you're good. Except for teams running multiple client tenants or jumping between test and prod, global installs can end up stepping on each other's toes. It's more common than you think. Settings and tokens lingering from previous sessions get reused, and now you're in a totally different environment than you expected. This is where profiles and smart installs come into play, features that most first-timers overlook. PAC CLI doesn't require you to bulldoze your existing workflow or make sweeping changes to your working environment. Instead, you can spin up a clean contained setup using environment variables or lightweight sandbox VMs to isolate your CLI usage. This means you're running side by side with the portal and other development tools, not replacing them. For anyone who's ever been burned by an installer that didn't give you an undo button, knowing you can play in a sandbox makes the difference between cautious curiosity and actual adoption. Let's walk through how this works in practice, because this is where most teams get stuck. Imagine you've just set up a new test environment. Instead of connecting PAC CLI directly to your company's production tenant, you start with a sandbox. Once the CLI is up and running, the first thing you do isn't build anything at all. It's authentication. You use PAC AUTH list to see which environments are already in the mix and PAC AUTH CREATE to link up with your sandbox. With this, you can explicitly control where your solutions and plugins get deployed. If something goes wrong, worst case, you break your isolated test tenant. Your production data is safe and untouched. But here's the trick that most folks gloss over. Environment profiles aren't just a nice to have. They're your insurance policy against those accidental, did I just overwrite production moments. Each authentication profile is tied to its own context, so you can jump between tenants like you'd switch tabs in a browser. You're not limited to a single set of credentials or stuck wondering which environment you're targeting. Every command you run is scoped. No more leaning over your desk, double-checking portal URLs while silently panicking that you're about to mess up something critical. There's a certain calm that comes from verifying your pipeline before you do anything irreversible. Once you've linked PAC CLI to the right test environment, run a dry command, query the environment, list solutions, or test a fake deployment. Most teams forget to do this, jumping straight from install to workspace changes. But those extra 30 seconds confirm that you're not making any changes outside your controlled space. And it's not just about safety. Knowing precisely where each action lands means you can trace every step later if something unexpected unexpected pops up. The beauty of this approach is how it lets you experiment with CLI-driven development without risking the stability of your production builds. You're free to build, break, and rebuild with zero fear that a missed flag or stray script will nuke your company's workflows. And once you're comfortable, that's when the CLI starts to shine. You don't just replicate what's possible in the portal, you unlock a toolkit for automating packaging, managing dependencies, and tracking changes. A whole new level of control over your Power Platform assets. Once you're running in a safe, contained sandbox, you start to see where the command line does things the portal can't. Managing environment-specific authentication, packaging entire solutions programmatically, and testing deployments without risking live data all suddenly become routine. The CLI anxiety melts away, replaced by the efficiency of scripting out every dull, error-prone process you used to do by hand. And the best part, you still have your portal experience for ad hoc changes and visualization. PAC CLI just becomes the safety net underneath. But none of that matters unless you can reliably move your work between environments. Now that the CLI is set up without carnage, it's time to see what actually happens when you package your components into real portable solutions, and why proper packaging flips the entire workflow on its head. Solution packaging from component chaos to real portability. If you've ever tried to promote a Power App or a custom component from dev to production, you'll know the pain of watching pieces fall apart mid-flight. Connections break, some controls don't show up. Custom logic that quietly worked in the sandbox suddenly fails in production, and you're left digging through mismatched solutions trying to figure out what got lost in the shuffle. This is the scene that plays out again and again on teams that treat component management as an afterthought. It's easy to think you can just copy a solution, push it through the portal, and move on. But that approach is exactly where environment sprawl sneaks in. Dozens of slightly different versions floating around, manual patch jobs, and a release process that relies more on muscle memory than anything predictable. Let's talk about the way most teams approach this. They build something in dev, test half of it, ship what seems stable to a higher environment, and hope for the best. Troubleshooting is a constant. One person's fix in QA becomes a brand new bug in prod. Instead of treating solutions as products to be packaged and maintained, they become side projects. You might see folders full of app exports and patch scripts nobody really trusts. It's not just inefficient, it's exhausting. And for anyone who ends up owning those apps, every update feels riskier than the last. This is where PAC CLI steps up. At first glance, those dry-sounding commands and PAC solution init, PAC solution add reference, PAC solution pack don't scream excitement. But under the hood, they transform how you manage business logic across environments. Instead of pushing random files and hoping nothing gets missed, you're building actual portable software assets. When you use PAC solution init, you create a defined structure, a blueprint. With PAC solution add reference, you tell the solution about every dependency, plugin, or custom connector it needs. And when you use PAC solution pack, the real power shows up. Everything gets bundled, including metadata, dependencies, and version info. Think of this like packing for a business trip. You're not just stuffing clothes into a duffel. You're systematically rolling socks, making sure your chargers, presentations, and even your travel adapter are accounted for. Every item has a place. You know what's in your bag, and maybe more important, you know what's missing before you walk out the door. That's what a managed solution does. No more hunting around for missing dependency files after the upgrade is already halfway done. This approach takes the surprise out of migration. You can unpack your entire solution in a new environment, hit deploy, and watch everything, including connections and required data, just appear as designed. The difference isn't academic. Teams that move to this style of packaging notice something else, less rework. Instead of constantly babysitting deployments, they spend more time actually building features. When everything lives in a single versioned solution, rolling back a bad deployment becomes straightforward. If a key dependency is missing, the packing process tells you before you create a mess in production. This predictability is worth its weight in gold the first time you push a solution to UAT and everything simply works. And it goes deeper. The lifecycle here starts with initialization, scaffolding out your solution with PAC solution init, so it's ready to grow. You can add references to plugins, flows, or even web resources as you go using PAC solution add reference. This isn't just a technical step. It's a way to build a checklist into your process. When it comes time to migrate, PAC Solution Pack wraps everything together, listing what's in the box and letting you spot holes quickly. You can version each package, track what changes, and even parallel test new features before merging them. This is the kind of operational discipline that until now often felt out of reach for Power Platform teams. One overlooked benefit is that you start treating every piece, every app, plugin, and connector as a component with a real life cycle. No more rewriting logic for every environment. If you need to apply a patch, you update the solution, increment the version, and push it. No manual copy pasta. This prevents drift, where dev and prod slowly become two different things, each with its own undocumented tweaks. Over time, your platform becomes a set of reusable modules, not a pile of half-connected scripts. There's data to back this up. Research and surveys point out that teams who adopt formal solution packaging spend significantly less time troubleshooting deployments. They move faster when building net new features because they aren't cleaning up last week's migration mess. And that's where you start to see the payoff. Shipping more often, with less stress and fewer late nights spent debugging invisible issues. Once you hit that groove, it's hard to go back to the portal's export-import routine. You realize how much time you wasted on manual deployment steps, copying, reviewing, double-checking, and hoping nothing fell through the cracks. The CLI turns solution packaging into a routine testable part of your workflow. Your only regret might be not setting it up sooner, especially as you see how reusable managed assets reduce those "it worked yesterday" mysteries. So, with solution packaging now squared away, the real fun begins, handling plugins and smooth, automated deployments. This is where PAC CLI goes beyond merely moving assets. It unlocks automation and true CI/CD that brings Power Platform in line with serious DevOps practices. Automation and plugin deployment, the missing link in DevOps. You've packaged your solution, everything looks tidy, and you're ready to ship that neat bundle to a new environment. But if you've worked with Power Platform for any amount of time, you know the easy part is over. The roadblock comes when plugins are involved. Custom server-side logic that quietly powers your most important business rules. A lot of folks still depend on the Maker Portal's UI to register these plugins. It seems manageable while your project is small. You open the web page, upload the DLL, fill in some basic details, and hope nothing gets lost in translation. But that security quickly evaporates as soon as you need to update, troubleshoot, or even worse, roll back a change after something goes sideways in production. Suddenly, that comfortable point-and-click workflow falls apart. You end up crossing your fingers, repeating steps with no guarantee that the plugin in production matches what's actually running in dev, or that anyone can even figure out which version is live. Here's where PAC CLI quietly rewrites the whole deployment story. The command line isn't just a convenience, it's an equalizer. With PAC CLI, you're no longer tied to one-off manual uploads. You can script plugin registration end-to-end so that the same build steps run every single time. Picture deploying a custom plugin for lead assignment logic across dev, test, and prod without redoing every field by hand. With PAC CLI, you use straightforward commands to register, update, and even uninstall plugins as part of your deployment pipeline. That shift turns plugin deployment from a risky chore into a repeatable, traceable process. The real trick is that you're able to roll changes out, validate them in lower environments, and if something isn't right, run the same script to revert or patch. It's not glamorous work, but it's how you stop worrying about hidden mismatches and start building confidence with every release. Let's walk through a scenario most teams have faced. Imagine you've finished a new plugin, say something that auto-assigns cases based on scores. You link it into your managed solution, then use PAC CLI to pack up the solution and register the DLL. Now you deploy to your sandbox environment. If an error comes up during the registration, you actually get meaningful logs. Instead of a generic registration failed toast that the portal sometimes dishes out, PAC CLI gives you a full stack trace. Maybe you missed an interface or the constructor isn't what's expected. The logs are detailed and easy to parse, making root cause analysis a matter of minutes, not hours. That's a shift. Instead of guessing what went wrong, you own the deployment. The same commands that drive plugin deployment locally can be plugged right into Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions. You build a pipeline where PAC CLI does the heavy lifting. It picks up your latest plugins, pushes them to the right environment, and reports back when each step finishes. It's a pattern that saves teams real time, not just in deployment, but in chasing down the inevitable oops moment when a plugin breaks during a release. By automating these steps, you lower the risk that someone will miss a detail at 2 a.m. or forget which DLL made it to prod. In practice, you see fewer last-minute rescue missions and more uneventful releases where the tech just works. There's another layer here that most portal-heavy workflows don't offer: real systems thinking. Once you're using PAC CLI as more than just a point tool, When it becomes part of your release pipeline, you stop treating every deployment as a unique snowflake. Instead, you create a pipeline that runs the same way for every environment and every release. You test changes in isolation, move them through quality gates, and automate validation. This kind of discipline is where you start to see Power Platform function like a true software ecosystem instead of a collection of one-off hacks that only you and your immediate teammates understand. The traceability that comes from automation is a big win too. PAC CLI logs every action, what was registered, when, and under which credentials. If you need to audit a deployment, you have a record. If something goes wrong, you follow the breadcrumbs instead of living with uncertainty. Compare that to portal-based moves, where the paper trail is thin and you're never quite sure whether that last saved timestamp tells the real story. For teams responsible for regulated environments or large portfolios, those logs aren't nice to haves. They're non-negotiable. Compliance, rollback, and troubleshooting finally feel manageable instead of intimidating. But it's not only about big enterprises with sprawling teams. PAC CLI doesn't care if you're flying solo. Automation, scripting, and reusable pipelines level the playing field, whether you're the lone Power Apps champion juggling multiple projects or supporting a global team. Even single developer shops get predictable deployments and fewer fire drills, all without investing in heavyweight infrastructure. The basics, repeatability, traceability, and error-proof packaging bring value no matter your scale. Since PAC CLI bakes these practices into day-to-day workflows, it quietly elevates everything you do across the Power Platform stack. Applications, components, plugins, each one becomes portable, auditable, and most importantly, not a pain to update. With automation in place, you can focus on building, confident that your releases aren't an experiment every time. So once your automation game is up and running, the final step is putting it all together, creating a Power Platform environment that isn't just less chaotic, but is actually built to grow with your needs and scale when new projects land on your desk. If you look at every Power Platform success story, speed is rarely the long-term advantage. It's about making sure every part of your ecosystem survives change, whether you're responding to new business asks or patching a bug that just popped up. PAC CLI is quietly the difference between building quick prototypes and architecting something that lasts. You're not just saving time, you're stacking the deck in your favor so your work doesn't fall apart during the next migration or audit. If you actually want more control and less firefighting, PAC CLI is where you plant that flag. Try scripting and see.